and welcome to the update to my living tier list. This update has been in the process for a long time now because I had this idea even before I finished the original one. And that idea was to expand this tier list so that it had a different tier list for every single villain in the game. And I'm happy to announce I've finally finished that, and it's finally ready for everyone to use. So, the beginning, I'm going to be just giving a tutorial of how it works, and then we're going to be jumping into the actual tier list for every single villain, complete with strategy tips that I wrote for each villain so that you can see some just general guidelines on how to defeat them and things to look out for. And throughout this project, it was really, really interesting for me to see how much the tier list actually changed from villain to villain, because for this original one here, which is how essentially every tier list works, that's just a general one, is that you have to choose what order your heroes go in, and then that's just one perspective on where the heroes should go. And the natural question becomes, like, there's different situations that these heroes are viable, so how accurate is this tier list to X villain? And now I finally just fixed that problem, so I'm really excited to share it. The arrow here expands the pages, and then you can go to the villain tier list from there. And then what you'll see is a drop-down menu where you can select any villain in the game, as well as edit the weighting factors that I chose to fit how you want, if you disagree with the way I interpreted the villain. Some strategy tips for each villain that I wrote, and then it outputs the tier list for that specific villain. A couple notes about this. Unfortunately, in the first version of the tier list I built, it didn't have the functionality for the pages to be added, and due to how it was set up, I wasn't actually able to just expand the old tier list to have that. So unfortunately, I had to make a new website. And this new website is simply called Marvel Champions Living Tier List.streamlit.app. The link to the new one will be in the description. The old one is still online if you get the old link, but just note that the current version says Marvel Champions Living Tier List.streamlit.app. And that link will be in the description. Another thing I want to note before we get started is that you'll notice saying that all of these characters are the best for Rhino. I think that's accurate, that a lot of the newer characters are better. But if you're a beginner and you want to get more beginner-focused heroes, all you have to do is click this Edit Weighting Factors button, go down to Simplicity, and then set that up higher. So I think 5 is a good level to where it's valuing the simplicity of the hero, but not overpowering the rest of the factors. So if we do that really quick, we change that to 5, you can see that it outputs a lot of the simpler to play heroes. And that can be great if you're a beginner. And if you're not a beginner, you can just bring that down to either 0 or even put it negative if you want complicated heroes. So if you put it negative, you'll start getting all the complicated heroes shifted towards the top. And so with the way I did this list, the simplicity of the hero wasn't taken into account, but I wanted to show you that to make sure that you understood that if you want a beginner-friendly tier list or want to have complicated heroes, you can just change that for each villain by just moving that slider. Also, I want to talk about what this list actually means, because I think it's important to define exactly what the tier list is talking about. So for this, all of the heroes in here are weighted specifically on their hero kits. It's not talking about how powerful of decks that they have access to. It's just talking about what can their hero kit do on their own. And by changing these weighting factors, I'm talking about what you need. So for Rhino, you need to have a survivable hero because he hits you for really hard, and that's about it, because Rhino's more of an easy villain. But for some other villains, you'll see wildly different weighting factors here. So for the survivable heroes, they're going to go a little higher. So you can notice Spider-Ham, very survivable. Doctor Strange has a lot of toughs that he can throw out. Spider-Man, Miles Morales can confuse, stun, and go tough, and has access to alter ego. Venom has healing alter ego. Captain America has really good defense. So you can see that the survivable heroes are shifted up because I chose for the weighting factors for survivability to matter here. And this doesn't mean that it's not all inclusive. So what this is kind of a measure of is how well does this hero's hero kit identity lend itself towards defeating the villain. But it's not necessarily 100% accurate that this is the case, because a lot of heroes have like super big strengths, but also some weaknesses that can be fixed with deck building. So this is all kind of agnostic to the deck pool that you're using. So if you don't need to have all of the cards available for you for this list to be relevant, what this is telling you is how well is this hero on their own going to do against this villain? And then if it's high on this tier list, you can expect that what this hero is doing on their own is more in line and more geared towards defeating the villain than some other heroes, so you don't have to deck build as specifically to beat this villain. I hope that makes sense. And now that I've gone over everything about the list, let's just talk about it. So for Rhino, I went over that the main thing that you need against Rhino is to have a survivable hero, because Rhino's main thing is that he stacks up his charges, he gets a big attack, and he can get overkill. But then outside of that, he doesn't do that much, except for in solo. You need to be careful in solo because the main scheme threshold is only 7 per player. So in solo, that means that if you go to Alter Ego, he schemes, gets a double boost, gets an advance, gets another double boost, you lose the game off that, which is really unfortunate. But that's really more of a solo problem than a multiplayer problem to look out for. So the best heroes, according to this, are going to be Spider-Ham and Doctor Strange, which makes a lot of sense because they're both survivable heroes that can kind of just completely shut down Rhino. And then we have, in the A tier, we have some more spiders, and Peter Parker made it up here, which is really nice because he has a great matchup against Rhino. And then if we scroll down, we can start seeing that as we go lower, we're going to get some squishier heroes like Hawkeye and Rocket and Quicksilver, Black Widow, Nebula, Wasp. You know, they're not as tanky as those heroes at the top. And then, unfortunately, Hulk is down there as well. So this is going to show, again, how this list works. It's taking general hero power into account, which is why Hulk is still lower, but he's not. He's still going to be weaker because his general power is lower than these other heroes, if that makes sense. And I'm happy to report, though, that Hulk is not the lowest on the list for all of these villains, which I'm really happy about, and we'll get to that. And then at the bottom, here's a bar graph just showing visually their scores that are printed out here. So you can see no hero is negative against Rhino, meaning that every hero should be able to do okay against Rhino. So now let's talk about the next villain, which is Klaw. And Klaw is an interesting villain. He brings out a lot of minions early, and it can vary wildly depending on what minion you get on how difficult he is. So if you get Radioactive Man as your first minion, it's going to be a really hard game, especially if you get the side scheme of the Masters of Evil. That game is going to be a nightmare and very difficult against Klaw. But if you get Weapons Runner as your first villain or minion, it's not going to be so difficult. And in expert mode, which this list is geared towards expert mode for the difficulty, he starts out with side schemes in play. So for Klaw, you want to have a hero that has good tempo at the beginning so that they can deal with that initial pressure from the minions and the side schemes, and also is versatile because you have to deal with both threat on the main scheme, side schemes, and minions all at the same time. So you want a versatile hero, which you can see Captain America made it to the top here. And Captain America, I think, is a great choice against Klaw. And it's funny to see that Captain America makes it higher up the tier list because he used to be considered one of the strongest heroes in the game. And that makes sense given those matchups. So I think seeing how this tier list evolves over time is also very interesting. And then we can see down here, we also have some other high-tempo characters like Psylocke, Venom, Doctor Strange, X-23, Wolverine. And also all of these characters are pretty good at thwarting. And they have damage available to them, which is what you need against Klaw. And then if we go down here, these heroes are okay. These heroes start to have a hard matchup. So Iron Man is not a great matchup against Klaw. And then down at the bottom, we can see Hulk, which Hulk in this scenario, he'll struggle with guard. He'll not be able to get rid of the side schemes. It can be really rough. So these heroes down here that have low thwart, they're getting punished here because Klaw needs you to be able to thwart and they need you to be high tempo. another caveat to this list that I want to mention is that this doesn't account for specific counters to the characters. So at some point, there's going to be a couple anti-synergies, which I'll try to point out when we get to them. But just know that specific anti-synergies between heroes and villains aren't taken into account for this list because it's more general than that. And now on to Ultron, who is the final boss of the core box. And he essentially just spams you with drone minions, and he steals the top card of your deck, which can be really tough to deal with. So when you're fighting against Ultron, you want to make sure that your hero is able to deal with that flood of drone minions that's coming your way. And the heroes that have that built into their kit are going to be a lot better than the heroes that don't have that built into their kit, because if you don't have it built into your kit, you're forced to build it into your kit, and then also it'll be less accessible. So I mentioned here to use the Hawkeye leadership ally in your decks, because he comes in the core box and is very good against Ultron. And it can make the difference for all the heroes that aren't good at dealing with minions. But you can see the heroes up here that are doing well. So like Venom, the Flash Thompson Venom with his multi-gun is extremely good against all of the drones. Captain America has Retaliate, as well as the Shield Toss to deal with minions, which is really good. Black Panther Shuri is very versatile at dealing with minions. And you can see her brother made it all the way up here with his Retaliate and his minion control. So you can see the characters with really good minion control are higher up. Another thing to note about Ultron is you see his Force Interrupt on stage 2 says when he attacks you, put the top card of your deck as a drone. And if you stun him, that means that it not only cancels his activation, but it stops you from getting another drone, which is a huge deal. So characters with status cards like Venom and Doctor Strange and Phoenix and Magic are going to be really good against Ultron. Also, Captain America has status cards. And that's going to help a lot because it solves two problems at the same time. It stops you from getting drone minions, and it keeps you alive, all with one status card, which is fantastic. So now here's the heroes that were good. And then Iron Man is interesting here. Iron Man and Ironheart made it up because against Ultron, you actually do have quite a bit of time to build your board. You want to try to keep Ultron on the first main scheme if you can, but it's not absolutely necessary. And then you have the entire second main scheme, which is really a lot of threat that you have available to use up to build up your board. So Iron Man and Ironheart actually have a pretty good matchup against Ultron, in my opinion, especially Iron Man. Like, you get the gauntlets out, and then you can really just take out the drones, and you have time to actually get them. Ironheart, once you get to stage 3, the progress counters are amazing at dealing with drones. And then if we scroll down, you can see Rocket. He's still on the weaker side, but because he's very good against minions, he's basically a B tier hero. You can see the score difference between like these heroes, like 53, 53, 52, and 52 here. So you see these heroes are essentially the same level of power, which is why I wanted to show the actual score. So Rocket makes it all the way up from like bottom of C to like up to the top of C/B tier. And then the characters that get low down here, they aren't as good at dealing with minions. So you can see Peter Parker is not very good at dealing with a bunch of minions like Ultron dishes out. He can solve it with his deck building, but that's not what this is talking about. It's talking about how the hero fits into that, because also basically every single character has that available to them to deck build for the scenario. So I didn't want to have the tier list just be talking about that, especially for people that don't have full card pools. And then all the way down at the bottom here, poor Hulk is at the bottom again. Promise, he's not there the entire time though. And that finishes up the core box villains. Now we can move on to risky business. And this is a extremely weird scenario because there's essentially not really any pressure at the beginning. It just kind of stalls with how long it will take to defeat him. So the best strategy against him is actually staying an alter ego or hero, it doesn't particularly matter, but you just don't try to flip Norman to the Green Goblin side until you're ready to just burst him. So, and he doesn't add enough pressure to stop heroes from building up their boards. So heroes that can just kind of sit there, build up their boards, and then be prepared to just completely wipe them out are going to be really good against Norman Osborn. So you can see Ironheart made it all the way to S tier with this. And then we have Iron Man, same idea. Deadpool is here because he actually does build up his board quite a bit, and he can just one-shot villains pretty easy. And then, yeah, Doctor Strange, really good. Bishop can store up damage and then do a big burst of damage. Silk builds up to a really powerful state. So that's kind of what this list was looking for, with these heroes that can build up to a very powerful state and then just kind of wipe them out. And then we can see the mid-tier heroes. You can see they're not as late game focused as those higher ones, because I think that strategy is very good against risky business. And then C tier, you can notice Hulk made it up, because this actually allows Hulk to kind of build up his board, and it's not a horrible matchup. So he might be a little, he's definitely a bit inflated here, but that's mostly just because every single hero can defeat this scenario pretty easily, in my opinion. And then down at the bottom, we have Black Widow, who bursting villains is not her strength at all, and controlling a villain that isn't doing anything is, not really as useful. Not to say that she's going to lose to risky business. I believe every character has a pretty good chance of beating risky business. Just her identity doesn't fit very well with this scenario. Now on to the next scenario of that pack, which is Mutagen Formula. And this is one of my favorite scenarios in the game. He deals you encounter cards at the beginning, which are likely going to be minions, and you start with a minion in play. And it's just sort of this chaotic state of dealing with so many goblin minions at the same time. And then if he damages you, it also adds threat. So you need to have good survivability, and you need to be able to deal with those minions easily. And also, since he deals 3 encounter cards on stage 3, you don't want to have to deal with those. So you want to try to one-shot stage 3 before he has time to deal those encounter cards out. So you'll get the encounter cards dealt to you when you flip them, but you'll never have to reveal them if you can one-shot them before that. So for this scenario, we're looking for essentially just really high damage and good tempo to deal with that early pressure, and the ability to one-shot that last stage and control his minions. So we can see Wolverine made it up to the top here, along with Captain America, Venom, and X-23. These are all great choices that really fit the identity of what Green Goblin is testing you for. And then down here, we can see some more characters that just have good minion control and good damage. So great minion control here. He just has quite a bit of damage available to him. He's great at one-shotting that last stage. Magneto can really mess up minions with his combos. Phoenix can wipe out a board of minions. And then Black Panther, great with minions. So you can see all of these characters really fit into that identity. And then when we go lower, these characters are all fine, but you can see that they don't necessarily both deal with minions really well, and also have the ability to one-shot extremely easily. So that's kind of, but they're totally fine. These characters are going to be fine. And then C tier, you start getting a little lower, and then D tier, unfortunately, Nebula and Black Widow, they're not really geared towards bursting the villain on demand. And Hulk made it up a little bit higher here, so good job, Hulk. Rocket Raccoon is unfortunately still pretty low here, and this is an example, I think, of it, the tier list not explicitly accounting for synergies and anti-synergies. Getting all of the minions and getting the card draw gives Rocket better economy than he otherwise would have. So I think it's fair for Rocket to jump up into B tier against this scenario, but unfortunately the list doesn't account for that. So there's an example of what I'm talking about. And also Star-Lord is another example of it not accounting for that, because the third stage giving you 3 encounter cards makes it really easy for Star-Lord to just completely one-shot the villain. So he would be a little bit higher even based off of that. So hopefully that makes sense. But generally, this list makes a lot of sense to me, at least. Daring Lamb from the future here, I accidentally forgot to talk about Wrecking Crew. So I'm back in the editing room talking about Wrecking Crew. And Wrecking Crew is kind of a weird scenario because it has so many different villains out there in main schemes that you have a lot of targets for everything, but nothing's really that bad either, and it doesn't punish you for going to alter ego like most scenarios do, because it doesn't affect how much goes on that main scheme, and the side schemes completing don't really matter that much. So against the Wrecking Crew, you want to make heavy use of alter ego, and then just choose whatever villain messes with your deck the most and just take that one out first, and then you'll be okay. So here's the tier list. There's not really anything that special to it, because it's sort of just, if your hero is generally good, it will generally be good against the Wrecking Crew too, because there are multiple different villains, and nothing's really that bad to deal with. So this is the Wrecking Crew one. So now let's go back to the past version of the Daring Line that forgot about the Wrecking Crew and skipped to Crossbones. Now on to Crossbones, the first villain of the Rise of Red Skull box. And Crossbones is sort of just he doesn't stand out to me as doing anything particularly unfair. He just does a lot of damage. So he has a card called Full Auto that, in my opinion, is the scariest card that causes you to take a bunch of indirect damage. So that card is scary. You want to track that in the discard pile and make sure that you know when it's in the encounter deck and possible for it to happen and when it's not, because you need to play around that if you want to increase your win rate against him over multiple games. So what you're looking for with Crossbones is just sort of a generalist approach. You don't need anything that special to beat him. You just need a solid kit. So then this is looking more like the tier list on the other page. That's sort of my general tier list. We have Spider-Ham and Doctor Strange at the top. These characters are just solidly good. So you can see it's not as specific. It's just kind of these heroes are all really, really powerful. These heroes are all pretty good. These heroes can do it, but it's not quite as easy. And these heroes can beat him, but it's going to be a little bit of an extra challenge. And that's how that kind of shakes out for Crossbones. Now on to Absorbing Man. And Absorbing Man is also a really weird villain because he doesn't really do anything. Unfortunately, the trait of the environment in play almost never matches the card, so he just doesn't ever do that much. And he also has a really, really thick encounter deck. So you can see he has 25 cards in his encounter deck. So even the mod sets that you add don't increase the difficulty as much as they do for other scenarios. I did note that his super absorbing power side scheme gives him all the traits. And on expert mode, I think it starts in play, if I remember correctly. And you want to just finish that as soon as you can. And if you don't, and then when you do finish that, it kind of shuts him down again. So yeah, it's not really that much of a challenge. Notably, there's no S tier here because it's just sort of everyone can do it. So yeah, I can show the list here just for your curiosity, but this one is not one of the more interesting lists to me. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say that these heroes are bad for it, but again, a super easy villain that doesn't require that much from you. It doesn't particularly matter as much which hero you take. I think this is actually a good opportunity to take these heroes that end up lower, like Drax and Hulk and Thor and Valkyrie, those heroes that generally end up pretty low, and take them up against Absorbing Man if you want to play them, because then I think they'll do fine. Now Taskmaster. And Taskmaster, I personally really enjoy Taskmaster. It feels really high pressure because of those the constant stream of damage that you're having to deal with. And I don't think it's actually incredibly hard to deal with, but it feels more difficult than it actually is. But it isn't negligible. You have to find a way to keep your health high. You have to be able to deal with scheming and minions and damage. And you need kind of just a deck that can do it all to beat Taskmaster. Notably, I think it's really worth finishing those side teams when they come out because the allies that are captured by Hydra are extremely powerful. So you want to have those as soon as you can. And if you're looking to specifically counter Taskmaster, if you use one way or another to bring that into play, that's a really good counter to him because then you can draw 3 cards, finish that, get a super powerful ally. It's very, very good. But yeah, Taskmaster, just kind of a generalist hero is what you need that can do everything. You need them to be able to do damage, support, survive kind of in equal parts. And that's why it looks kind of like this. All of these heroes, they have very complete hero kits and that they have answers to all of those things in their kit for the most part when you look at this. And then as we go lower, we're going to start seeing heroes that start having weaknesses. So Ghost Spider has some reliability issues. Nightcrawler is lacking a little bit of damage. Iron Man takes some time to build up, so you can see that. And then slower tempo heroes tend to be in here, and then the usual suspects down here at the bottom. Now on to the next one, Zola. And Zola is a much more difficult villain than the other ones from Rise of Red Skull. He has Retaliate on his identity, which is tough to deal with, and I think this is actually the first time we've seen that on a villain that they have printed Retaliate. So you don't want to do a bunch of chip damage to Zola. It makes it very difficult because your health will just start chipping down. And also, he brings in a lot of minions. And unlike Ultron, where they're just kind of, you can just like hit them once and they die, these minions are sort of mid-range minions that are coming in frequently, and they get these attachments on them that give them different bonuses, such as like increased health, or they gain guard, or some other effect. And it can be really tough to deal with. Sometimes when you're playing Zola, it can feel like you have everything under control, and then it looks like you're going to win, and then he just completely changes everything. And then in the span of the next turn or two, all of a sudden you're on the back foot again. And I really like how dynamic the Zola scenario feels. And also, he's one of my favorite villains to mess with the mod sets because he's interacting with minions and attachments that go onto those minions. You can just build in interesting minions into his kit, and then he'll bring them out and mutate them. And I think that's very, very cool and interesting. I have this one game with Hawkeye where I was using the fantasy modular, and the dragon came in, and then Hawkeye took out the dragon. It was one of the best games I've played. So fun. And then you want to find a way to get around Retaliate when you can. So there's some cards in the game that say deal damage, but it's not technically an attack, and those cards don't trigger Retaliate. And then a core box card, which is a great tech against Zola in my opinion, is actually just Relentless Assault, because it can take out those minions, and the overkill damage that goes on to Zola does not cause you to take Retaliate because Zola wasn't the target of that attack. So it's this weird little rules interaction, but it gets around the Retaliate. So just throwing in 3 copies of Relentless Assault into a deck, I think is a great idea. And if we look at the heroes here, we're looking for heroes that can play a high-tempo game because he adds pressure early, that are able to deal with all of these mid-range minions and have the damage to take him out, because one of Zola's weaknesses is actually having a low health pool. So then Wolverine fits that exactly. Captain America also fits that bill. So you can see that these heroes that are really good against minions and have a high-tempo strategy end up towards the top. And then, yeah, that's what this list was looking for. So the heroes that do that are here. And then as we go down, you'll start noticing less and less damage and lower tempo heroes. And then going all the way down, we can see Hulk's not at the very bottom. I personally would probably have Hulk below Black Widow here, because Black Widow is good against minions, but that's sort of, again, a specific synergy that is not taken into account explicitly there, that she has that card that specifically goes against minions. But yeah, this is a pretty good list in my opinion. So like these heroes at the top, I think are great against Zola. Now on to the final boss of this one, which is going to be Red Skull. And Red Skull brings in a ton of side schemes. So you need to be able to deal with that, because he's going to bring in a side scheme every single turn. So you have to be able to remove a bunch of threat to do that. And if the side schemes start getting out of control, those extra icons and stuff that are on them are going to start piling up, as well as Red Skull's going to have more attack. So you really, really want a hero that's able to thwart. And you probably also want to play Justice, but you also can't only be thwarting, because the sleeper will come in at some point, and you will need to deal with the sleeper. So you have to have damage available to you as well. So heroes that have high threat removal, but then are still able to deal with the minion, are going to be here. So Doctor Strange is up here because he has some of the best threat removal in a hero kit of anyone in the game. And then we can see other high threat removal heroes like Psylocke. She's fantastic at threat removal, getting 3 thwart at the beginning. And then Captain America, as always, because he's just he fits the bill a lot because he's just good at everything. And Phoenix, really high threat removal. Miles, great at threat removal and also can stay alive really well. So you can see high threat removal heroes are at the top here. And then as we go down, we're going to start seeing lower and lower threat removal heroes. So poor Hulk has a negative 28 score against Red Skull because he just can't thwart very well. And it's unfortunate. I do not recommend playing Hulk against Red Skull. So Kang is actually, he's one of my favorite villains in the whole game. I really, really like him in 3 and 4 player multiplayer. I've done that so many times, and it's a blast every single time, because it's just so fun to me when we all get split up and thrown through the time stream. And it's also a great challenge for the players, because you don't know what you're going to get on stage 2. The different versions of Kang have different strengths. So you need to have a hero that's able to deal with all of these different things. And yeah, that just generally you want a very reliably strong hero against Kang so that you can deal with whatever he throws at you on stage 2. And yeah, so this is going to look very similar to the normal list. And yeah, here it is. So we can scroll through here. Here's the A tier, the B tier, the C tier, and the D tier. Again, poor Hulk and Thor and Drax and Valkyrie and sometimes Hawkeye, depending on the scenario. There's not really any tricks to beating Kang. He just is kind of what he is. You can't really game the system that much against Kang. You just kind of have to be ready to deal with whatever he throws at you. So there's not any specific like tips and tricks for Kang, really. So now onto the Guardians box, starting with Drang. And Drang's thing to me, the thing that stands out the most about his difficulty is how much threat is there, especially in multiplayer, because the main scheme goes up by 2 per player each turn, and the side schemes have a lot of threat on them. The Milano helps with that because you can exhaust it to remove 3 threat from a scheme, which 1 resource to remove 3 threat is a really good return. So that helps a lot in solo dealing with Drang. But the Milano gets outscaled as you add more players, so you're going to need a very strong Justice player in multiplayer to help deal with Drang. So those heroes that can deal with those side schemes are the ones that are going to be high on the tier list here. And then that goes back to Doctor Strange, Psylocke, Ham, all these ones that are really good at threat removal are at the top. So here's the A tier, B tier, C tier, and the D tier, which unfortunately these heroes I would never really want to play against Drang. That sounds awful. Thor might be okay with how many minions are there, but still, the threat removal would be a very big problem for those heroes. Then on to the Collector, which the Collector is a really interesting one because he specifically changes how you have to play the game. He collects your allies, he collects your upgrades and your supports, and he collects the minions and the side schemes that are in play when they don't have victory. And it's really rough, especially once you realize that the Collector collects his own cards. This scenario gets very difficult, especially if you don't adapt your strategy and you're still just using a bunch of allies or something like that. You can't just rely on allies to defeat the Collector reliably. So you're going to want a high-tempo hero because he's really hard to stick around with because of how he works. And he also has a low health pool. So you want to be able to take that health out very quickly. And you want to be playing an event-based hero that can survive without needing the allies to block for you. So in that instance, we get Miles as the top, which I think is awesome because Miles, I think, is a fantastic matchup against the Collector, along with Wolverine, who he can just take the hit, heal up, uses events. Captain America has good defense and good events. He doesn't need the allies to block for him. X-23 is really high tempo. Doctor Strange with the Invocation deck is it's never even in play, so like that kind of totally counters him. So yeah, you can see event-based heroes with high damage are going to be up here. It's like Gamora's up here. I really like Gamora against the Collector. And as we go down, less don't fit that as well. And then you can see that some build-out heroes are here. So like, and look at Hulk. Look at him go. Look at him all the way up in the middle of C tier. Good job. Hulk with a rush strategy is actually quite viable against Collector. I wouldn't say it's like, you're not going to win every game or anything like that, but it is pretty good. And Black Widow honestly could even be even lower with her preparations going into the collection. So yeah, good job, Hulk. I told you it would happen, that the Hulk would legitimately not be the worst hero in the game to play against some of these villains. So that makes me happy. On to Collector 2. I think this is the first scenario in the game that is sort of the escape version where you're trying to finish the main scheme as the victory condition. And yeah, so you can thwart the main scheme either by just thwarting it normally or just taking him out, because you can see when Collector would be defeated, remove 3 per player threat from the main scheme and flip this card instead. So that can help to get through that threat. And yeah, so if your hero is either really good at thwarting or really good at damage, you're going to be great at this. A strategy tip here is you don't want to just sit around with the collector. Or sorry, no, not you don't. What I mean is you don't want to flip the main scheme to the next stage if you don't have a little bit of threat removal in addition to that, because it starts with such a high threshold that if you can't thwart it as soon as you flip it, you're vulnerable to getting advanced and losing the game. So if you want to have more consistent wins, make sure that you're flipping the main scheme and then thwarting it a little more after that on the next stage. So here's some heroes that are really good at damage, threat removal, or both. So yeah, that's this list. Here's the B tier, C tier, and Hulk didn't do so good. And yeah, so the lower threat removal heroes are going to be down here. And then higher threat removal heroes are going to be a bit higher, and also heroes that have big burst damage will be a little bit higher, such as Wolverine. Okay, now on to Nebula. And Nebula is kind of a crazy villain because the difficulty swings you're going to experience with Nebula are wild. Some games, she will just sit there and you won't get, if you start getting the standard set or something like that instead of her scenario-specific cards, it's going to be a pretty easy game. But when you start getting surge after surge after surge, and she starts stacking up evasion counters, that can be very rough, and it can feel really, really difficult to win. So to mitigate that, don't stick around with her. Just take her out as soon as you can. Another thing about the evasion counters is you can't let them build up, because if you let them build up too high, you're just going to lose in like a couple turns to the evasion counters. So you need to keep those in check, and you need to just play a really high tempo game against her. So characters with really good tempo, like Wolverine, Miles, Captain America, those types are going to be higher up. And then the lower tempo heroes are going to be towards the bottom here, because that's kind of how Nebula works, at least in my opinion. And now the one we've all been waiting for, the final boss of the game, Ronan. So Ronan has a little bit more thought put into him than the other ones, just because this is sort of, I really spent a lot of time trying to get this one to make sense, because Ronan is kind of, if there's any place to do the tier list where I'm like thinking very specifically about one strategy and not a generalist approach, that would be Ronan. And against Ronan, he hits for so much, literally like 8+ damage all the time with Ronan, that just taking that damage is not viable. So you need to find a way to deal with that, either through your character having some sort of broken defense ability or by using allies. But the thing is that if you're using allies to block those hits that literally one-shot you, then that's also rough, because he has this upgrade called attachment called Fanaticism, that's going to give him overkill and piercing on his next attacks, as well as surging, which can easily surge into attacks against you. So that's really rough. So another big part about Ronan is actually just manipulating the encounter deck to avoid that, because basically if the cards lay right for Ronan, he just one-shots you, or he finishes the main scheme. So like you can imagine, like if someone was there dealing the encounter cards that you get and choosing which encounter cards you get against Ronan, you'd essentially never win. And so it's really about avoiding that, either through getting lucky and just not dealing with it, or by having really strong control in your kit, plus using cards that let you order the encounter deck to just get rid of his cards to get rid of that. So that's the thing you have to do against Ronan. Another thing is that he starts Stalwart with his hammer, or the universal weapon, and the cost to get rid of it is so great that I'm not sure it's actually even worth it. Like a lot of the times it's not worth it, because you have to take 2 damage and deal yourself an encounter card to get rid of it, just to shuffle it back into the deck, and then it will often just come back. And the boost effect brings it into play, and as an encounter card brings it into play, so you're very likely to just get the weapon again after taking that huge tax. So that's rough. But characters like Magneto, for instance, that can just get rid of it with his electromagnetic blast thwart event that he has, are really good. Also, the Sunfire ally can bypass that ability and get rid of it, throw it in the discard pile, and then once you do that, you're open to stun locking him. which is another very powerful strategy against Ronan. And another thing about Ronan is you really have to just find as broken of a build as you can, because Ronan's difficulty is not really fair, in my opinion. So you need, if there's ever a time to do really broken strategies, it's in this scenario. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the heroes that fit that. So Cable is up here along with Spider-Ham and Bishop, because they're just very good at doing that. Cable has control of the encounter deck. He can like discard cards and stuff off of it. He has cards that let him block the damage from an entire attack, which is very good. Same thing with Spider-Ham. He's able to just block damage from the entire attack, which is fantastic against Ronan. That's pretty much why Peter makes it up this high, because if you really need just really high economy to spam allies down and deal with all the encounter cards that he's going to throw your way. So high economy, high survivability heroes with control in their kit are what you're looking for Ronan. And also, so that's why Spider-Man's there, Spider-Ham, Cable. Wolverine made it up here because he's just survivable, and just having a bunch of damage is also really important against Ronan, because you need to take him out quickly. You can't stick around with him because you're giving him more time to just do his broken combo that will take you out. So you really want to play a high tempo strategy as well. And then Magneto is up here, Miles is up here. So with Miles, you'd want to run like a Sunfire type deck, get rid of the universal weapon, and then stunlock him. And yeah, so that's kind of it here. And then Star-Lord, great for rushing. Captain Marvel just has huge economy to try to spam broken builds, essentially use her as a vessel to do the broken builds. And then Deadpool, as long as you're not taking damage from Alter Ego, he's really good against the damage there. And then we'll get down here to the characters that are less good against Ronan. And you can see Hawkeye down here did not make the cut because his main way of staying alive is status cards, and that doesn't work here, unfortunately. And Hulk, not the bottom again. You can just kind of try to rush him with Hulk, and that does work. If you're just wanting to try to get lucky, avoid some of his bad encounter cards, and just hit him in the face, you can do that with Hulk. So there, that's the Ronan tier list. And now we can move on from Ronan and go to Ebony Maw, the Mad Titan's Shadow expansion's first villain. So Ebony Maw adds a lot of pressure at the beginning with his spell environments that he puts into play. But it's not exactly pressure at the beginning. It's at the first few turns of the game. So his thing is you're going to start with spell environments in play, engage with you. And then when he activates against you, you remove counters. And when the last counter is removed, the spell environment happens. So you can plan around that. And that's going to be key. And stun locking him, I think, is actually the best strategy, because when you stun him or confuse him, he's not going to trigger his interrupt to remove counters from the spell environments. So you're shutting down two parts of his kit, not just one, which is very, very powerful. So characters that have status cards are going to be very good against Ebony Maw. And then we can see some characters up here that are really good at status cards, like Doctor Strange. Spider-Ham is just really good, which is why he made it up here. And then Psylocke, Venom, and Miles, they're all really good at status cards, status cards, status cards, status cards. So you can see I'm recommending that you play characters with status cards if you want to counter Ebony Maw. And then when you go to the bottom, you'll see less status cards. And poor Hulk, and Valkyrie, and Thor, and yeah, the usual suspects down here at the bottom. There's actually a funny gameplay I did it with Rocket against Ebony Maw, where I just got completely one-shot by a crazy surge train, because Ebony Maw is actually prone to surge trains. So that's another thing about him, is that sometimes you'll have a really hard game against Ebony Maw. So he's not to be underestimated. Now moving on to tower defense. And tower defense isn't really asking anything that specific of you. It's just sort of asking you to be able to deal damage and be able to deal with minions and be able to do thwarting, but not on a ridiculous level. So it's kind of just the normal type tier list is here. Some strategy tips against them. Why don't I just scroll through the list while we're doing the strategy tips? So the strategy tips that I would recommend against them is to utilize how much threat that's on the tower, because it can take a hit. It can take a big hit before it actually gets flipped. So sometimes it's okay to just let Proxima's scheme finish, because Proxima's scheme is the one that deals damage to the tower. And yeah, so just let it finish, let the tower take the hit. It's not going to take it out on the first or second time that she triggers her main scheme. And then you don't have to worry about threat removal for a while there. And then on the flip side, if you're playing campaign mode, which is my favorite way to play this box, and you're trying to keep the tower on the healthy side, the scenario gets a little bit more difficult, which is fun for me. And then also, you can just let Corvus's main scheme finish to deal yourself an encounter card instead of having the tower take damage. So I like the sort of control that you can get there in the ability to choose which one is going to finish. And their encounter cards aren't so scary that it's like a game-ending thing to get one of them. So it's fine if Corvus's scheme finishes most of the time. Also, I think it is notable that they can kind of team up and sort of just like add each other's stats to each other, which can be a bit scary. So watch out for that. They're not complete pushovers, but as long as you're being thoughtful about your decisions, you should be able to win against this scenario. Now Thanos. And Thanos is an interesting villain because he's difficult, but he's also not difficult. So the first time I played against Thanos, I lost a bunch. I lost 4 or 5 times in a row. And then I eventually figured it out and beat him. But there's a very specific strategy to use against Thanos. And it's due to him not really adding that much real pressure to you. It feels like there's pressure because there's the gauntlet, there's his his helmet that starts in play on expert, and then you have Sanctuary, the side scheme, and then there's the Infinity Stones and all that. So it feels like there's a lot you have to deal with, but there isn't actually that much you have to deal with because there's no reason that you have to interact with Thanos. You can just ignore him and not hit his health bar at all, thwart the main scheme, and then build up your board. So all you have to do is keep the main scheme in check while you play your upgrades and supports, and then you can quickly outpace him. And then also, since the Infinity Stones aren't surprises when they go off, you can see which one is going to go off that turn before it goes off. You can play around this specific stone that you have. So as long as you're being thoughtful about that, you should have time to just build up your board, keep the main scheme in check, and then get to a point where your hero's strong enough to just take him out. So heroes that are good against Thanos, in my opinion, are the ones that are just trying to build up their board, like Maria Hill, Cable, Silk, Ironheart, that really want to just set up this unstoppable engine. Like an Iron Man fits into that. And then this is basically a bastion for late game heroes, in my opinion. Thanos really lets late game heroes shine as long as you have thwarting in their kit and or just build it into their kit. So that's my advice against Thanos. So I guess the other thing to mention is he does have a couple scary encounter cards. The Avatar of Death gives him overkill and piercing on an attack, but just keep track of that. He doesn't generally one-shot you entirely, and since you can just thwart and then go to Alter Ego and heal, you don't have to be low health. So it's not normally going to take you out when you do that. But it is important to be aware of where the 2 copies of Avatar of Death are so that you can know if you have to play around it or not. So now on to Hela. And Hela is another scenario that's very gameable like Thanos is, where she wants you to just sit there and or she doesn't want you to do that. I should say the best strategy to defeat her is to just sit on the first scheme. So you take out Garm as soon as you can, and then she has a very thick main scheme, and the acceleration icon, one of them, isn't that big of a deal. So what you do is you just do the same thing where you take out Garm, you sit there, you build up your board, you get all your upgrades and supports down, and you keep building until you just have completely outpaced her, and then you kind of blow through all of her side schemes and minions at once and then take her out. And that's the pattern that works the best against Hela. So characters that can just kind of sit there and build up a powerful board state are going to be very good against Hela. And then the characters that don't build up to a powerful board state are going to be lower. So, poor Hulk again. And now on to Loki, who's the final boss of this expansion. And Loki is an interesting villain in that he has a lot of different forms, or not forms specifically, but different villain cards that you can face. and they all have different strengths and weaknesses. So like this one that's in the picture can't take damage while there's a side scheme in play. Another of them like can't get stalwart. Some of them have high attack, some of them have high scheme. So you never quite know what you're going to get yourself into when you're playing this. And status cards aren't great either because the multiple of the Lokis are stalwart. So you kind of have to have like a self-sufficient, versatile, high-tempo hero that's very reliable in a variety of different situations. Because if you build too much into one thing, then certain Lokis will counter your strategy. And another thing about him is his mod sets are particularly awful. So Enchantress really locks you down. Frost Giants can lock you down. Loki can lock you down. The Gauntlet slows you down. So adding all of that together, it can really sort of like stun lock your hero essentially. So you want to be able to make sure you can deal with everything to avoid that happening. Because if you start getting behind, it'll get harder and harder to catch back up. So then heroes that are going to be good against him are these versatile heroes that aren't relying on status cards and have good thwarting and damage, which I think is what's good against Loki, in my opinion. And then if we scroll down to the bottom, the usual suspects, but in slightly different orders. And yeah, that's the Loki tier list. I think this is a good chance to point out. I want to show you again what the difference in the beginners would be. So if we just set this up to 5, we'll start seeing heroes that fit that strategy, but are on the simpler side. So like Captain Marvel is up to S tier, which I think is really, really important for new players, especially to just bring that simplicity up and pick a simple hero that also fits the scenario at hand. Now we can come to the Hood. And the Hood is really interesting. He's very dependent on the mod sets that you choose. So making a tier list for him at all is a little weird just because it's so different what's going to happen depending on the mod sets, and he is encouraging you to use different mod sets. But so the way I did this is generally a mod set composes of some minions and a couple side schemes. So the heroes that are good against both minions and side schemes and are really reliable so that they aren't getting countered by certain mechanics as much are the ones that made it up here. So that's why Captain America is up here. Venom is up here, X-23. You can see that these are the very reliable heroes that can deal with both side schemes and minions, and they don't have like a super counterable game plan. And then towards the bottom, we're going to see less and less reliable heroes, like Hulk, for instance, who cannot deal with side schemes very well. Okay, so that concludes the Hood. Oh, I should probably talk about strategy. So the Hood can kind of build up his board, and in my opinion, the best way to defeat the Hood is actually to just play a high tempo / rush strategy. He doesn't have that much health, and the longer you stick around with him, the more times you're going to have to trigger foul play, the more encounter cards you're going to get. So you really want to play a high tempo strategy against Hood, in addition to having the ability to deal with both minions and side schemes. Okay, and then we're into sinister motives, starting with Sandman. And Sandman, I really like Sandman, but he has he's very counterable, because the main thing that he's doing is he's building up these sand counters, and the higher the sand counters are, the more cards he'll discard, which will get him closer to dealing the indirect damage to you for resetting the deck, and also it'll make the sand clones stronger. So his power scales with those sand counters, and unfortunately, all you have to do is get a 2 or 3 attack ally, and then put them on sand counter duty, and they just exhaust every turn to remove the sand counters, and it pretty much just shuts Sandman's strategy down, which is a little unfortunate. But yeah, other than that, he's not really. The main thing he's testing is going to be your survivability, and your ability to just play an ally on turn 1 is kind of what that's looking for. So yeah, heroes that are good against high survivability are going to be good against Sandman, and unfortunately, he is a very gameable scenario. Now into Venom, who is gameable, but in a fun way that doesn't feel imbalanced to me. And Venom's whole thing is around this bell tower, and he hits you for a lot, and when you hit him, you get a boost card that will increase his activation against you. So he can hit you pretty hard, and the more you hit him, the harder he's going to hit you, which I think is really fun. And then a way that you can mitigate that is to kind of to use the bell counters correctly. So the way it works and is it checks for when it's over a certain number of counters, and then it flips. So the best way to use it is to get it to where it's like 1 before it's about to flip to the ringing side, and then hit Venom with the biggest attack event you can, so that you can add the most possible counters to the bell tower as you can. And that will give you more safety against his big attacks and increase your damage, because while there's chime counters there, you deal increased damage to Venom as well. So that's my biggest tip about that. So heroes that have really high damage are going to be really good against Venom. And also a fun thing about Venom is that hitting him actually removes threat from a lot of his side schemes. So you want a survivable hero with a lot of damage against Venom. And that's why these heroes end up here. So like Bishop, Wolverine fit that description exactly. Deadpool fits that really well as well. And yeah, and then you're going to see lower damage, lower survivability heroes as we move down the list. And look at Hulk. Look at him go. Look at him go up there. Proud of him. Okay, so that's the Venom tier list. And then on to Mysterio, which is one of my favorite villains. And Mysterio is another one where I think you want to play a high tempo strategy against him, because the longer you stick around with Mysterio, the more he can set up what he's wanting to do, and you never really outpace him. So at a certain point, you just have to choose to just hit Mysterio in the face and take him out. So the heroes that are good against Mysterio, in my opinion, are the ones that can just delete his health bar. So it's just going to be really high damage, high tempo heroes are good against Mysterio, which are going to be these ones. Star-Lord is one of my favorite heroes as well. So I'm glad that he made it up there. One of my favorite heroes against one of my favorite scenarios. I got to try that. I don't know if I've actually done that matchup, and I really want to do that matchup now. So there is the Mysterio tier list. And now we can go on to the next one, which is going to be the Sinister Six. And I really, really like this scenario. It really feels like the Sinister Six are just like teaming up on you, and that's awesome. It's a lot of fun. And in my opinion, the best strategy against the Sinister Six is to just take them out as fast as you can, because it kind of solves all of your problems. The Sinister Six get stronger when there's more of them out. And if you let too many of them be in play at once, then it starts getting very difficult. And by taking them out, you're removing threat from light at the end, which is your victory condition, and you're weakening the potency, the power of their encounter cards. So just playing really high damage heroes, I think, is a great way to defeat this scenario. So then we have Wolverine, X-23. They kind of end up here a lot when you're playing a high tempo, high damage strategy. Miles, Captain America, Deadpool, Doctor Strange, Star-Lord, all these types of heroes are really good. And then we can scroll down so you can see all the heroes here. And yeah, and unfortunately Black Widow, just most of the time when I'm looking for a scenario that has just really high damage, Black Widow doesn't do too well, because she just doesn't have that high of damage in her kit. Not to say that she can't defeat these scenarios, because you can do very powerful builds with her when you have a full card pool of preparations, but her kit on its own isn't sufficient for a lot of these scenarios. So now on to Venom Goblin. And I put a lot of strategy tips here because there is a lot that goes into this. And Venom Goblin, he adds a lot of pressure, just like Mutagen Formula. So you're going to be under high pressure at the beginning. And then he has 3 main schemes, and there's going to be threat going on all of them, and they all have a different ability. So Venom Goblin, to me, is you have to follow that pattern from Mutagen Formula where you build up your board so that you can one-shot the final stage, because if he deals you 3 encounter cards towards the end of the game, and then you reveal all 3 of those encounter cards, you're probably going to lose. So you want to make sure that you can try to burst him, so you don't have to deal with those. But you also want to have a hero that can has good late game power, has good threat removal, has a high economy to deal with all of these different threats that he's throwing at you, and can survive well. And another weird thing about Venom Goblin is that the advanced glider specifically wants you to discard 3 cost worth of attack events, which is a really weird condition. So heroes with 3 cost attack events are going to be good, but heroes that are strong, so like Black Panther, you'd think would be really good against Venom Goblin, but if you're playing with the Goblin Gear one with the advanced glider, he unfortunately doesn't have an attack event in his kit, so that is just sort of this weird anti-synergy. Where you'd think Black Panther would be really good, but then it's not because of that modular. But you can also always just switch out that mod set. I evaluated this with the recommended mod sets in mind, but this is a scenario where I do think switching the mod set is very valuable for this because of just the way that advanced glider works. And then some tips on the where to move the glider counter. So it's going to go to the one with the least threat. So in the beginning of the game, I think it's good to go to Lower Manhattan because that's the one that just adds threat to the main schemes. So it's not dealing damage to and it's not discarding cards from your hand like the other ones do. And since you're wanting to build up your board and deal with these other threats like the minions and side schemes that come out at the beginning, you don't want to also have to be going to Alter Ego to heal and losing cards in your hand. So using that as sort of a buffer in the beginning to build up your board state and deal with the cards that are at the beginning, I think is a good idea. And then in the mid game, you have to be adaptable and just do whichever one makes sense at the time. So the tier list that it came out here, what had these heroes at the top that can kind of deal with all of these different threats, because you have to be able to do everything. You have to be able to thwart, you have to be able to do damage, you have to be able to stay alive, you have to be able to build up your board, and these heroes tend to be able to do that. Star-Lord has a really fun synergy here with the 3 encounter cards thing. So I played Star-Lord against Venom Goblin and actually defeated him on turn 2 with a rush strategy. So Star-Lord is great against Venom Goblin. Yeah, and then on to B tier, C tier, and D tier. And Black Widow is just, again, down here because she doesn't have good burst damage in her kit, so she'll really struggle to take Venom Goblin out in one turn on the last stage. And now we're on to the mutants. And Sabertooth is a really weird scenario. So he heals a bunch, and you have to rescue the Senator. And then once you rescue the Senator, you have to protect him for the rest of the game. So your hero has to have a solution for keeping that ally alive. So heroes that are actually good at supporting other heroes are going to be pretty good against Sabertooth. And normally I didn't add, I don't have support weighted heavily or at all in most of these scenarios because I'm talking about how well the hero fits into this. But in the scenarios where you have to protect allies, like in this one, the ability like what Doctor Strange has here to give the tough status card to allies is really, really good against Sabertooth. So that's one thing about Sabertooth. And another thing is that you don't want to do chip damage to Sabertooth because if you're not planning on taking him out in the next 1 or 2 turns, he'll just heal all of it back. So yeah, you don't want to just do a little bit of damage to Sabertooth because it actually becomes completely useless. So you need to beat Sabertooth, you need to have a way of keeping Robert Kelly alive and have burst damage available to you. And another thing, just strategy tip, is that you don't have to rescue Robert Kelly immediately. It's okay to let Robert Kelly take a little bit of damage while he's sitting there attached to the scheme because it gives you some breathing room to build up your board during that time period without having to protect him every round. So that can be very valuable. So don't feel like you have to rescue him immediately. Another fun thing is that you can just also rush Sabertooth and never rescue Robert Kelly and just try to defeat both sides of Sabertooth. I've done that before, and it's really funny. I did that with Black Panther, actually, and it was just really, really fun to rush Sabertooth and not rescue the Senator. So here are the characters that made the list here. I was looking for high survivability, good support stat, good burst damage, and these are the characters that fit that bill. So you notice Peter Parker makes it up here because he just can block really well for Robert, and he has good burst damage with his swing web kicks. And then when we go lower on the tier list, we're going to see characters that aren't as good at that, like that. So Rocket Raccoon, for instance, not the best at burst damage, not the best at defending Robert Kelly. And then we can move on to Project Wideawake. And Project Wideawake really punishes chump blocking. because your allies will go under Operation Zero Tolerance, and that will cause you to lose the game. And also the Sentinel on expert mode, it starts out steady, and then on the last stage it's stalwart. So status cards also aren't good against this scenario. And they actually have quite a lot of attack, and the Sentinel minions that are coming in also are they'll really hit your health bar quite a bit. So you have to figure out a hero that's able to survive without using allies or status cards. And that's going to be very important for the Sentinels. And a hero that fits that very well is Wolverine from the healing. And X-23, because she can block every round and then ready up, which is really useful. So you can see that these heroes are very good at surviving without relying on status cards, because they have either high defense or high healing or both in a lot of cases. And when we move on, we're going to start getting to the squishier heroes, like Jubilee, for instance, who really wants to use status cards and isn't very tanky. She's not good against this scenario. And Hawkeye, not good against this scenario. Which is going to be Master Mold is another Sentinel scenario. But this one is going to check how good you are at dealing with minions as well. So he's Stalwart, and then every time he schemes against you, you get a Sentinel minion, which can be really rough. So you need to be able to deal with minions very well. So these characters, like Wolverine and Magneto, very, very good. Magneto would probably be my personal choice for, the theme of like him just beating up a bunch of Sentinels. Actually, that brings up another thing about the unique rule. So that's a whole thing. But the Magneto ally helps a lot in this scenario. Because he has 3 attack and heals when he defeats a Sentinel. So having a support hero that can keep Magneto alive is going to be really good. And I forgot to mention that. So yeah, the Magneto hero, well, I normally would really like him in an anti-synergy that is not accounted for due to the unique rule. Okay, and then moving down the list, there's the A tier, B tier, C tier, and the D tier. And now on to Mansion Attack. So for Mansion Attack, there are these main schemes that have global effects on the table. So like one of them will give all the characters retaliate, another will give them all +1 attack, and you can let 2 of them finish, or sorry, you can let one finish, and then still win. So the second main scheme 2 that finishes is what causes you to lose. So that's another thing, is that the first main scheme that's just giving you setup instructions actually counts towards the loss condition, which I forgot when I first played this scenario, and it still just feels weird to me. Yeah, so you gotta remember that. So you can let one of the main schemes finish, and that's important to realize, because if you're playing an ally strategy, for instance, and there's the retaliate one, that's really bad, because you don't want your allies taking extra damage for just activating. So you don't want that. So if you have the retaliate main scheme out, it's really in your best interest probably to let it finish so that you can get a more favorable one, such as the +1 attack one, which will help you a lot with the allies outputting damage. So that's a strategy tip there. And then the Mansion Attack scenario isn't doing anything really that dangerous. You just have to be able to deal with minions, you have to be able to deal with threat, and you got to stay alive, just kind of like other scenarios. So the tier list doesn't look super different from the normal generic one that's on the home page of the site. So there is the tier list. And now on to Magneto, which is the final boss of this box, and he's my favorite villain of this box. There he is. Yeah, there's just so many to scroll through now. So the Magneto, he is a super interesting scenario. I really like how he works. He starts out steady, and he has these side schemes that you have to go through. But after you finish the side schemes, he loses steady, which is very valuable for you. And he has another thing where you can't deal damage to him, or deal more than a certain amount of damage to him until you've defeated that side scheme. And if Magneto finishes his main schemes before you finish the side schemes, you get an extra punishment. So in my opinion, the best strategy against Magneto is you finish the side schemes as fast as you possibly can, and then start stun locking him, because when you stun him, he doesn't activate, and then he doesn't add magnet counters as well. So that's very important. Another thing to be aware of is that there's an errata. So the errata says to remove the magnetic counters before triggering the ability, and that's just to avoid having the ability trigger itself and do multiple in a row. And then another rules thing to be aware of is that the magnet counters don't carry over from one main scheme to the next. So that's some rules things that'll help out. And then, yeah, so the characters that are going to be good here are going to be the ones that can stay alive because he hits quite hard, can finish the side schemes quickly, and then can stun lock Magneto. And that's the best strategy against him, in my opinion. And these characters like Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Venom, Phoenix, Psylocke, those all fit that build really well, and I highly recommend these characters for fighting Magneto. And then when we go lower, we're going to have lower threat removal heroes that don't have status cards and are maybe a little squishy. It's like Hulk, for instance. Or Hulk. Yeah, that's a rough one, buddy. I don't recommend that matchup for Hulk. Okay, I'm going to start typing the names in here because the list has gotten very long. So on to Magog, and I really like the Magog scenario. The Magog is it's really just a brawl. It's like just an arena brawl where he's hitting you and you're hitting him, and then whoever hits the other person harder wins. So the characters that are going to be really good against Magog are going to be the ones that can do a lot of damage to him so that you can actually win, and the ones that can not just be survivable, but specifically use status cards and high defense and to not take any damage at all so that you don't add counters for Magog. So yeah, Miles fits that bill really well. Spider-Ham, this is an example of an anti-synergy that isn't present. I don't actually recommend Spider-Ham because he wants to take damage to get his tune counters, and that gives counters to Magog. So yeah, that's an anti-synergy, so disregard the Spider-Ham being S tier. But yeah, Miles, very good at that. Doctor Strange can just sort of infinitely stun lock and give tough status cards on Magog here, which is really good. Wolverine just has really high damage. Captain America would be fantastic because he has high defense as well as a stun on his attack vent, which is really good. Venom can stun, has high damage. Very good character there. Yeah, so you can see the tier list here. So this scenario really rewards just high damage characters. And look at Hulk. I think Hulk is actually pretty good in this scenario because Hulk has high defense as well as high damage. So Hulk really fits the bill for this. Okay, and that's the Magog tier list. Now on to Spiral. And Spiral is a lot to deal with. So you have to finish this side scheme over and over to search for the find Spiral environment, and then that causes Spiral to become cornered, and then you can actually deal damage to her. So when she's not cornered and she's on the escaped side, she can't take damage. She can't be stunned, and you can't remove threat from the main scheme, which is rough. So when you actually do corner her, you got to do big bursts of thwarting on the main scheme as well as big bursts of damage in order to take her out. So the characters that are able to do that, where they have high threat removal, high burst damage, and high burst damage, are going to be the ones that are good against Spiral. So these characters fit that bill based off the weighting factor that I chose. Another thing is that the crime modular is very difficult with Spiral. That one stops you from moving threat from other side schemes. That can make it very difficult. So watch out for the crime modular. And then another final tip is don't forget that you're allowed to take 2 damage to remove 3 threat from search for Spiral. So in a pinch, you might need to do that. And also maybe you just want to, especially if you're playing a hero that doesn't have as good of thwarting. So now on to Mojo. And Mojo is a villain that's actually very difficult in my opinion. And yeah, he's possibly an underrated villain on difficulty because every time I play Mojo, it's a massive challenge. You have to play a really high tempo strategy against him because if you don't, you literally just get like checked by the environments, because he's discarding so many cards off the top of his deck, and you only have a certain number of encounter deck passes before you just lose the game. So you have to be playing very efficiently and getting damage on him when you can, so that you can actually end the game in time before he ends the game on you. And when the deck resets and you have to deal yourself those encounter cards from the mod set, it's a lot of pressure to add on. The hardest mod set that I've experienced here, I think, is the horror one. That one just tends to make my life really difficult when I'm playing against Mojo. But you really want to just play a really high tempo strategy and like borderline just rush him, but also having high threat removal is good, which is why X23 ended up here. Yeah, so high tempo characters that have high damage and good threat removal are going to be really good against Mojo. And then here is the tier list. Okay, and now next evolution came out, so I believe the next one is Morlock Siege. Let me just check. I want to make sure I'm not skipping any. Yep, Morlock Siege. And Morlock Siege is, I think it's a bit underrated on its difficulty, specifically in expert mode, because the final villain will end up having Retaliate too, which is very difficult to deal with. So in expert mode, each villain under routed will add Retaliate to the next villain, so it can get Retaliate 1 on the second villain and Retaliate 2 on the third, which is a lot to deal with. But then you have to protect the Morlocks, and the Morlocks, as long as you can let the first main scheme finish with knock counters, will come in with a tough status card, which can be very useful. But having heroes that have good survivability so that they can deal with the Retaliate and also protect the Morlocks are going to be a good matchup, in my opinion. So Doctor Strange is here. He's very good because he can protect the Morlocks very well with those tough status cards. And then high tempo characters, high survivability, all that stuff. They're very good against the Morlocks. Here is the tier list. I'll scroll back up, and then we can talk about the next one, which is On the Run. So On the Run, you're only going to get one of these villains instead of a multiple of them. And yeah, it's sort of just a normal scenario, in my opinion, on the difficulty. One thing that you should be aware of, though, is that the teamwork trait is a little bit difficult to deal with in this. So you want to make sure that you're being able to deal with minions well, because there are a lot of minions, and the teamwork trait punishes you for not being able to deal with those minions. So kind of just normal, like generally strong heroes with good minion control are good here. And also I want to mention the teamwork errata. So now with teamwork, only the minion that just entered play is the one that activates instead of both of them. So yeah, here's the tier list here. Heroes that are good at dealing with minions and generally strong. And oh, that's another thing. Since it's random which one you get, you want to have a really reliable hero, because you don't know which villain that you're going to encounter. So reliable heroes with good minion control are what are good for this scenario, in my opinion. And the next villain in the box is Juggernaut. And Juggernaut just hits really hard. And while he has his helmet on, he has overkill. And these momentum counters that he gets increase his attack. So if you let him get going, he can hit you for a ton of damage with overkill. And I really like how his main scheme works, where when it finishes, it causes him to attack the players, which is really fun, in my opinion. And the general strategy against Juggernaut is to just take off his helmet and then beat him up, essentially. But that never goes well for me. He always seems to put his helmet back on and then pummel me, which maybe that's just a me thing, but I find Juggernaut to be actually quite difficult when I fight him. But I do think the best strategy is to just take his helmet off and then stun lock him and confuse lock him while he's not stalwart anymore. So the heroes with high survivability, access to status cards, and are going to be good against Juggernaut, in my opinion. So that's going to be these types of characters up here with the status card crew that often ends up at the top here, and then just heroes that are really good at staying alive. So I can scroll down here. And yeah, and now on to the next one, which is going to be Mr. Sinister. And Mr. Sinister is quite a difficult villain. He adds a lot of pressure early, and the superpower attachments that he gets are very strong because like one of them can give him overkill. That the flight one gives him overkill, which that one's particularly difficult to deal with. And status cards are really bad against him because after you place a status card on Mr. Sinister, or not after a status card is placed on Mr. Sinister, you place 2 threat on the main scheme. So that includes if he gives himself tough, which can be tough, especially since his main schemes have low threat thresholds. So yeah, you're going to want to play a character that is a really high tempo against Mr. Sinister because he's throwing a lot at you early. And also, you have to be reliable because you don't know which attachment he's going to get when the main schemes advance. So yeah, reliable characters that don't rely on status cards are going to be better, are going to be good here for this scenario. Okay. And now on to Stryfe. And Stryfe starts out with a lot of threat on the main scheme. Sorry, not the main scheme, on the side scheme. So the initial thing is a race where you're trying to finish the bomb. That's the bomb that's representing hope. Sorry, your hope is in his grasp, and you're trying to get to rescue her essentially. And then you're trying to do that before the main scheme finishes. So it's like a thwarting race at the beginning. And then again, when you flip it, you have to, there's the bomb side scheme, so you have to finish that one too, which can be difficult. So you need to have a lot of threat removal when you're dealing with Stryfe. So the characters that have a lot of threat removal, I think, are going to be good, which is going to be these characters here. Also, characters with high base stats are going to be really good, that because Hope Summers copies the base stats of your hero, which is the same for kind of all of the scenarios, all the last 3 scenarios of this box. So now after that, we move on to Age of Apocalypse. And Unus is actually quite a difficult villain, in my opinion. I think all of these villains are pretty difficult. The gene pool side scheme can get out of control very easily. And when it gets out of control, it increases Unus's strength as well as the infinite minion's strength. So you can see when it's at 3, Unus gets Retaliate, and then he gets Stalwart, and then he gets Amplify, and then the minions will get Guard and +3 hit points and Surge, which is really, really bad. So you want to keep gene pool low if you can, and that means that you don't want to rely on chump blocking, which means that the survivability of your hero is going to be important so that you can more easily deal with chump blocking, or deal with staying alive without having to chump block. And then high threat removal heroes are going to be good as well because it's really hard to keep the threat low on gene pool. So you want good threat removal to manage that. So looking for a survivable hero with good threat removal is going to be good against Unus. So here's the tier list here. We had the A tier, the B tier, the C tier, and the D tier. Okay, and then we have the 4 Horsemen. And the 4 Horsemen is a very crazy scenario. It's another multi-villain scenario, and it really feels like you're just being swarmed by these Horsemen of the Apocalypse. I think they did a really good job with that. And each one of them is going to have a different ability that happens after they activate. So you can see Death here. After Death activates against you, or attacks you, if he has at least 1 hit point, deal 1 damage to each character you control. And then each of them have that bad effect. So, but you see they have to have a hit point remaining. So what you can do is prioritize which one you want to take out. So look at your deck build, and depending on the deck that you're playing, one Horseman will be worse than a different Horseman. So if you're playing a deck that has good upgrades and supports, which is a lot of decks, you probably want to take out War first. Or if you're playing a deck that's not that good at surviving, or a low survivability deck, you might want to take out Death first. And another thing to mention here is that I think stunning them is very good because you can skip that ability once you stun them. So those types of characters are going to be good. You want to have high damage so that you can take out them quickly. Also, there's side teams that start in play, so you have to have high damage, high threat removal, and access to status cards is really helpful here. So now scrolling through the tier list, these are the characters that fit that description. Okay, now we're on to Apocalypse 1. And Apocalypse 1 is sort of an evolution of the Hela scenario, except it's not nearly as gameable as Hela. There's a lot more pressure. You can't just sit there not interacting with him, because he gets all these upgrades, attachments onto him that increase his strength, and you have to take out his health to get rid of him, to get rid of those attachments. So another thing to point out, though, is that taking out his health actually allows you to remove threat from the main scheme that bypasses the crisis icon. So I think that's really important as well. And then the prelate minions are also difficult to deal with because they have 5 per player health, which, especially in multiplayer, that can be a very, very big minion. So there's not really a secret sauce or a special trick to this. It's just you have to think on your toes, and you have to remember that damaging Apocalypse can get rid of his attachments and then also thwart the main scheme. And then you just have to have a versatile hero that's able to survive, able to deal with side schemes, able to deal with minions, able to do villain damage. You just kind of have to do it all, and it's a really fun challenge. And I also think it's so cool having 1, 2, 3, and 4 stages of Apocalypse. A lot of difficulty variation, because you can just start at stage 1 if you want an easier game, start at stage 2 if you want like a standard game, start at stage 3 if you want an expert game, or if you just want to like make it as hard as possible, you can start on stage 4. So here are the heroes that fit that description. And then C tier and D tier. Okay, now Apocalypse 2, Dark Beast is next. Dark Beast is the most chill scenario in this box. It's not that he doesn't do anything, it's just that the other scenarios are doing so much that it can kind of feel overwhelming. And then you get to Dark Beast and it's like, oh, all he's doing is throwing me through the timeline and has these environments that trigger off his activations, which is a lot actually, but it's kind of relaxing after going through the other Apocalypse scenarios. And I really like Dark Beast. There's 3 different environments that you can get. So you want to make sure that your hero is reliable and versatile because they have different effects. And really, it's kind of just like a classic game of Marvel Champions. It's more akin to the Klaw and Absorbing Man and Crossbones and Zola, that type of era. Dark Beast feels like he fits well in there. And it was a good break from just feeling like I'm being swarmed by dealing with the apocalypse. It was a nice little reprieve from that in the campaign box. So here are the heroes that did do well against Dark Beast, based off of the setting that I chose, which is a caveat for all of these different scenarios. I think this is a good one. Maybe let's look at the beginner tier list here by just putting this higher. So yeah, if you're a you want a beginner-friendly list, you can always just adjust that simplicity slider and then output some simpler heroes towards the top, but that are still good against the scenario. Okay, now on to Apocalypse 2. And this is the first 3-sided form-changing hero that we got, and I think it's really interesting. So each of his sides has different strengths to them. So the Biomorph side here, after he changes to this side, deals 2 indirect damage to each player and grants his attacks overkill. So if you're relying on allies, that's pretty bad against this one because he has overkill. And then the Cyberpath one adds threat to each scheme, which is really scary, and has Retaliate, which is really scary as well. Retaliate's hard to deal with. And then the third side is the giant side of him that has Stalwart and heals. And I think that's actually the easiest one to deal with, at least in the time I've been playing him. And yeah, so he's really just kind of doing it all. And this is a super engaging scenario to play, especially in multiplayer. My only real sadness about this scenario is that he doesn't quite feel like a final boss in solo because he doesn't change forms as much. But when you go up to 2, 3, and especially 4 players, he's like at 4 players, he's one of the most difficult final bosses in the game. So I really like that it's kind of like, at least the way I view it, is that Apocalypse 1 is sort of the solo final boss, and then Apocalypse 2 is sort of the multiplayer final boss. And that's fun. I think the sweet spot's probably between 2 to 3 players of playing against Apocalypse, in my opinion. So here are the heroes. You really just want like a versatile hero that can deal with all those different threats because he's doing a little bit of everything. So you need your hero to be able to deal with a little bit of everything to defeat him. And that ends the mutant saga and brings us to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. starts with Black Widow. And Black Widow is not to be underestimated. Normally you think of the first villain of the box as being easy, which if you think about Sabertooth, Unus, and Black Widow, those aren't actually easy scenarios at all, in my opinion. So maybe that's not actually an accurate statement. But Black Widow is quite difficult. She adds a lot of threat to the main scheme because the main scheme goes up by her stage number per player. So an expert, it's going up by 2 per player. And then the last stage makes it go up by 3 per player. So it's a lot more difficult in expert as well. And then every time you flip her to the next stage, she adds more threat to the main scheme. So it's a really threat-heavy scenario. But when you attack her, or a character you control attacks her, you get to remove a threat from the main scheme, but then you discard the top card of the encounter deck, and it is a preparation card. And if it has a preparation ability on it, you trigger that preparation. So it's sort of a trade-off there between doing many instances of damage to remove more threat, but then you're risking having her trigger more preparations. So there's not really like a good strategy, really, other than, I guess, Maria Hill so that you don't have to attack to win, but we don't need to talk about that. So yeah, and if you do burst damage to her to avoid the preparations of like, I'm hitting you with like one big attack, then you risk the acrobatics one, which in expert mode reverses that damage back onto you, which is really scary. So she like magic cylinders you from Yu-Gi-Oh! Essentially. So yeah, it's a constant balance of figuring out how much do I need to attack her, how much do I need to thwart, and then do I want to do instances of damage or mini instances of damage or some less big instances of damage. So these are the characters that I think fit that description of being able to deal with all of those different things that Black Widow is throwing your way. Okay. Also, the Black Widow mirror matchup is probably a fun one to play. Okay. And now moving on to Batroc. And this is a ally rescue scenario where you're trying to like infiltrate AIM and keep the alert level low, because the alert level, if it goes to high alert, makes things harder. And you can spend resources to bring that down. And then you need to rescue the captives and then escape from there. And you need at least one of the captives to survive. So heroes that are able to spend resources to keep the alert level low and keep the captive allies alive on the last stage where they're being quick struck by the minions and Batroc are the ones that are good against that. So you want a hero that can deal with, that has good survivability, that can defend for those captive allies, has high economy, and then has good support abilities to support those allies that you get. So Doctor Strange fits that bill pretty much exactly, which is why he's the top there. And then as we go lower down the list, you'll start seeing lower economy heroes with lower survivability. Okay. Now on to M.O.D.O.K. So M.O.D.O.K is another captive ally rescue scenario. You're rescuing Inhumans in this one. And M.O.D.O.K on Expert has Retaliate 2. And on Standard, he has Retaliate 1. So hitting him is difficult, similar to Zola. And then M.O.D.O.K is bringing out these Adaptoid minions as well, which you want to take out as soon as you can because it helps you remove the lock counters, and also they can become strong, so you don't want to let those sit around with you. And then he gets attachments onto himself, which you can remove by defeating him. So, and also defeating him removes lock counters. So it kind of solves two problems at the same time. So you essentially need high economy heroes with good burst damage and good minion control are good against M.O.D.O.K, because then you can remove lock counters with your economy, you can remove lock counters by bursting M.O.D.O.K, and you can deal with the Adaptoid minions. So these are the heroes that fit that description. Like Wolverine, I think, is fantastic against M.O.D.O.K. And then scrolling down, we're going to have lower damage heroes, lower economy heroes, essentially. Okay, and then moving on to the second to last one, which is the Thunderbolts, which is a multi-villain scenario in the sense that the Thunderbolt minions are essentially villains. So the Thunderbolt minions represent the first stage of the villain, and you don't actually want to hit Citizen V until you defeat them, because Citizen V will just sit there healing. So you want to take out the minions before you start damaging Citizen V. So having characters that are just really high damage that can get rid of those minions are going to be really good against Citizen V, because that's how you essentially win, is you just take out those really hefty minions before they can heal up by going out of bounds. So you'll see a bunch of high damaged heroes being towards the top of this tier list for the Thunderbolts. Okay, and then moving on to the final boss of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is going to be Baron Zemo. So Baron Zemo, to me, he's mostly a campaign villain. You can play him standalone, but I think he's a lot better in the campaign mode, where you get to have all of that work he did by finding them all kind of culminate in this scenario. So yeah, you need to stop the board members from finishing, and then get clues to figure out which one's the mole, and then take him out when you move to the next stage. And you need to spend a bunch of resources to keep the board members from finishing. So the high economy heroes are going to be the ones that are good against Baron Zemo, in my opinion. So looking here, you'll see just a bunch of high economy heroes that have good survivability as well, because Zemo gets a sword and then deals damage to you. So you want high economy and then high survivability against Baron Zemo. And that brings this video to a close. So this has been my tier list for every single villain in the game, and it's just another iteration of my living tier list. So the link to this will be in the description of the video, so that you can all use it, reference it before you go into a game, use it to help choose your characters that you want to play. And I'm really happy that I finally finished this, because I think it's really interesting to see how the different villains want you to play different heroes. I was really happy that the tier list, when I actually used the weighting factors to figure out what is actually good against this villain, the tier list reflected that really quite well, in my opinion. There's obviously a couple problems with just like anti-synergies and synergies that aren't accounted for, but generally I think this is a really cool tool, and I'm really happy to have made it for everyone, and I hope you all get a lot of use for it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll check those out. And also, any feedback for the tier list, always I'm open to hearing that, because since this is the living tier list, I'm going to be updating it all the time so that it can more accurately reflect the game and be a more useful tool for all of you to use. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the tier list. I hope you enjoy the website. I hope you use the website. And yeah, it's been a great time making this for everyone. So like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff that helps out YouTubers, and stay zesty, and I'll see you next time.